Q&A, a bit of a discussion here, because really, in a sense, we're sort of already kind of here all on the same page, and I don't think that I need to convince anybody here about the importance of Venezuela. It came out on a Friday night right before a snowstorm, so obviously you care as much as we all do. So I just want to give a little bit of an overview, some of the important issues, some of the larger geopolitical issues I think that are in play when we're talking about Venezuela, what's happening in Latin America, and why this is all important. So let me just begin very quickly by pointing something out that I think often, or too often, is left out of the discussion of Venezuela, and that is this little thing called colonialism. And U.S. colonialism and U.S. imperialism in Latin America has a very, very, very long and very sordid history. And Venezuela is in many ways the center of that, especially in the 20th century. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the old 1950s newsreels or documentaries about development in Venezuela, but it's fascinating. It's, usually, some narrator comes on and he says, this small isolated country in Latin America is really exploding in growth. You see the oil production, you see more oil production, and oil production is really what we're talking about here. And Venezuela was made into essentially an oil colony of the United States. And to a large extent, that's how it operated for decades. Now, the reason I bring that up is because we have to understand what the Bolivarian Revolution and what Hugo Chavez means in relation to U.S. imperialism. It means the first time that a Latin American country since let's say since the CIA assassinations and coups of the 1950s, the first time that a country in Latin America was able to break free of the imperial system and to set a course for itself, a course of development, a course of independent political, economic, social, and cultural development that was not beholden to U.S. imperialism, that was not even beholden to global capitalism, with the exception, of course, of oil and global oil markets, which, of course, plays a central role in how Venezuela is able to function. Unfortunately, the legacy of U.S. colonialism left Venezuela with an oil-dependent economy, and the Venezuelan people and Hugo Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution was forced into a position of having to harness that in order to develop the country. So when people say, oh, you see, Venezuela is just this one-dimensional oil economy, they don't do anything, they don't produce anything, they got nothing happening, they're just sitting on their oil money. The question you have to ask then is, well, why? Why is their economy set up that way, and who set it up that way? What people often forget is that the Venezuelan people have only controlled their oil for roughly 13 years. It's not a very long time. Certainly not long enough to be able to build up an infrastructure that can resist global capitalist forces. Very difficult to operate in a climate of economic and political hostility. And that really is how Venezuela's been operating. And despite all of that, Venezuela is the vanguard of anti-imperialism in Latin America. Without Venezuela and without Hugo Chavez, there most likely would be no Evo Morales, there would be no Rafael Correa, there would be no Daniel Ortega, there would be no left in Latin America, period. And so when we talk about Venezuela and we talk about the importance of Venezuela, we also have to talk about what Venezuela means for the rest of Latin America, and what Venezuela means for those of us around the world who call ourselves anti-imperialists, who say that we are in a struggle against global imperialism. Venezuela means far more than just one country. Venezuela represents an idea. And that's what the Bolivarian Revolution really is. Okay? It is an idea, it is a process. And that's something that is difficult for a lot of people to grasp. And that was even something that, as Isolina was telling us, is even difficult for a lot of people in Venezuela, including a lot of Chavistas, to keep in mind that this is a process and that they've only been independent, quote unquote, for less than 2 decades, which is a very short time in the grand scheme of things. So this is leadership. That's what Venezuela has been providing in Latin America. That's why, I don't want to speak for Caleb, but I would assume Caleb would agree. That's why, for me, Venezuela was such an important issue. That's why it was so central to my own political development these last 17 years. That's why Venezuela matters. Now, there's another force in Latin America that we have to keep in mind, and that is the right wing. Because the right wing is not indigenous to any given country in Latin America. The right wing is an arm of US imperialism all over Latin America. The right wing is a proxy of the United States. It is directly controlled by the United States in various forms, be it through funding, through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, or the National Endowment for Democracy, or USAID, or the U.S. embassies themselves. Okay? All of these different institutions act as conduits for U.S. power manifested in Latin America by the right wing. And that is obviously rearing its ugly head in Venezuela for all of the reasons Caleb and Isolina were talking about. It's now rearing its head in Brazil as they try to destroy the, let's call it, social democratic left-wing government of Dilma Rousseff. Whatever people, criticisms or whatever aside, we know what the right wing in Brazil has done historically, and we know what the left wing in Brazil has done historically, at least these last 15 years or so. In Argentina, we just saw the resurgence of the right wing taking power, looking to undo all of the gains for working class people and poor people in that country under the Kirchner and Cristina Fernandez governments. We see all of these things, and those of us who see them through the lens of imperialism understand how these things are connected, and how what's happening in Venezuela is a reflection of an attempt at resurgence by U.S. imperialism throughout Latin America. They watched their position slip these last 15 years, and now they're striking back, and they're striking back hard. And understand that it is not simply about power for the sake of power. They want to prevent the Chinese from having relations with Venezuela. They want to prevent the Chinese from building in Nicaragua. They want to prevent any countries developing any kind of independent relations in Latin America unless it's under the auspices of organizations controlled by the United States. So Venezuela turns around and establishes its own independent institutions, ALBA, Petrocaribe, CELAC, many others that have been founded by Venezuela, by Hugo Chavez, that have had the leadership in Latin America. All of that the United States wants to undo. And what we witnessed in Venezuela is one way that they're doing that. And so I want to talk a little bit about how it's happening in Venezuela, how imperialism is striking back. Number one, and honestly, I unfortunately, this is just an inescapable fact. They've been very, very successful at waging an economic war against Venezuela. Very successful. Anybody who calls themselves a Chavista and tells you that things are not so bad, they're lying. That things are tough for people right now. Things are difficult. Imperialism, the United States, the imperial system is very good at undermining, destabilizing, and overthrowing governments. They've done it for as long as any of us can remember, and they'll continue to do it. And they're doing it right now in Venezuela. This happens in the form of speculation against the currency, taking the currency out of the country, contraband out of the country, illegal exportation of commodities, illegal exportation of goods. It happens in the form of manipulated and manufactured scarcity, as Isolina was talking about. It happens in the deprivation of staple goods. Isolina was mentioning it in her address there, and I couldn't help but laugh because on my way to Venezuela, I went through LaGuardia, and they took my sunscreen. They wouldn't let me take my sunscreen through the airport. They said the bottle was too big. So I said, all right, shit, that's a pain in the ass because I get burned easily. So I said, all right, what are you going to do? So they took my sunscreen. I never did find sunscreen in Venezuela. I was there almost 2 weeks. Never did find it. Never found deodorant, which for some reason I didn't have with me. Don't know why. Never did find it. Now for me, it was a minor inconvenience. I was there for a relatively short period of time. But what if I lived there? What if that was my everyday life? Constantly looking for basic goods for my life, for my daily life. That would get hard. That would get frustrating. You would psychologically begin to identify your personal problems with those in power. And you would say, well, shit, I can't get sunscreen or deodorant. Somebody's got to pay for this. Well, who's going to pay for it? It's the government. I'm going to make them pay by voting against them. Yeah, I know these right-wingers are no good. I know. But you know what? This is the only way I can say that I'm pissed off. We heard that all the time. I mean, I felt like, 10 days, I couldn't find this stuff. I was like, I get it. I understand why people are pissed. This is the kind of psychological war that imperialism wages. If you want an interesting insight into how they operate, go look at the CIA's CIA booklet on destabilizing Nicaragua against the Sandinistas. Part of the strategy of the CIA was to make the people of Nicaragua identify their personal problems with their government. And to say, all of my problems are because of these Sandinistas. And if I could just get rid of the Sandinistas, my problems would be solved. Or at least things would get a little bit better. Maybe the US will ease up on us. I don't know. This is right in the CIA playbook. We all know it. It's public information. Anybody can go look it up on Google. Anybody who wants a document, I happily email it to you. This is how